Article in today's FT is doing the rounds on oil traders' desks. Oil price shock, but not as we know it.
No, that's right. That's what Paul Stevens, he's an eminent professor based at Chatham House, which is a think tank in London, and he's suggesting that oil prices could have a shock, but downwards rather than upwards. So not the huge spike we saw in prices in 1973, for example, or in 1979 when the Iranian Revolution happened, but in fact quite the opposite, going down. He doesn't quantify it, and he doesn't give us a time frame, so we can't really trade on it.
That's why he's at a think tank.
That's
perhaps.
Exactly right. But he's got a point, because he's talking about demand and the way prices affect demand. What he's saying is that very high prices that we've really seen over the last 2 or 3 years, $100 a barrel or more for quite some sustained time, has undermined consumption, and it's changing the way governments look at prices. For example, in the Middle East, many of the subsidies on oil, many of the populations in the Middle East have been not facing real world oil prices at all. Those subsidies are coming off, and that's going to have an effect on demand. At the same time, very high prices are eroding demand in many of the countries such as China, India, and of course in Europe and the United States.
So is what he's saying, though, anything new here, which can give the oil price or traders extra momentum and direction and food for thought?
It's not new, but all the elements have been gathered together. He's writing a very clever piece, in fact. He's got the ear of a number of the big players in the market. And we know, for example, that those in power in Saudi Arabia know him, like him. He's very well respected. He's a friend of all of us. He's a good person, and he has very solid connections. And he's saying, if you put all this together, if you look at the way demand supply is happening, particularly the revolution of shale and tight oil in the United States, so the gradual increase there, this is potentially really worrying for prices, especially for governments like Saudi Arabia that have played a swing role. They want to maintain stable prices, and this could be a real challenge. And he's saying, as long as the Saudis are prepared to maintain their role as a swing producer and balancing supply and demand, everything's fine. But the pain eventually may get too much. Don't forget, Saudi Arabia, like all the other governments in the Middle East, have been facing increasing pressures.
Social pressures.
Exactly, and that has raised their cost. That means that their cost thresholds have gone up.